Hi, I'm Caity Green.
Hi, I'm Dan Green, and welcome back to the Greening Out podcast. Now, today we're branching out and doing something a little different, and we're going to learn about a philosophy that's got many misconceptions surrounding it, and that is modern Satanism. Joining us to discuss this is the spokesman and co-founder of the Satanic Temple, Lucien Greaves. Lucien, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you.
So, Lucien, would you like to tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and about your background?
Sure. I guess what's relevant for me when it comes to Satanism is when I grew up. I was in the middle of what the sociologists now call as the Satanic Panic, when there was a big kind of moral panic regarding this idea of satanic cults going around and murdering babies and murdering people and cannibalizing and doing all kinds of horrible things. And later on, I began to wonder whatever happened to this. How could something on such a massive scale, they would be claiming hundreds of thousands of deaths per year, more than the average homicide rate for any other kind of death.
Yeah.
And I wondered how it could be that this was never actually brought to light, definitely, and revealed and or pursued even. So I started seeking it out, and I met a lot of people who self-identified as Satanists. I met with some of Anton LaVey's priesthood and friends from the Church of Satan, and I met with members of an organization from the 60s that was known as the Process Church of the Final Judgment. Me and one of the guys from the band Skinny Puppy went and tried to collect a documentary footage of these guys who were often considered to be the most dangerous satanic cult in the world. And what we found was, of course, a completely different story. They were just really some kind of hippie group of artistic intellectuals. And so I developed quite an affinity for Satanism, its imagery, its aesthetic. And I was really compelled to figure out what drove people to self-identify as Satanists, despite all that's said about it. And really, I find that's part of the reason people embrace their outsider status. They reject arbitrary authority, and they like this kind of idea that they can read between the lines and see things really for what they are, and regardless of what the propaganda is.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I alluded to the fact that there's some misconceptions, so we may as well just, get straight into that. For anyone who doesn't know, you don't worship some horned guy. Tell us about what modern Satanism is really about.
Well, a lot of people object to the idea that you don't actually worship a supernatural being called Satan and yet call yourself a Satanist. But really, the philosophy is such that it rejects the very notion of bowing before a god. It uses Satan, the Luciferian kind of literary construct of the rebel angel, the ultimate rebel against the eternal tyranny.
Yeah.
And that's really where this kind of philosophy comes from. So actually to worship a god in the name of Satanism to us would be contradictory.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I noticed that you've said before that religion doesn't have to be about, superstition, but like some people would maybe say, oh, why do you use the term religion? Like some people, that might confuse some people.
Right. Well, in the United States, that's a particularly relevant topic, and it's not just a matter of semantics. If you were going to say that you must necessarily have some belief in the supernatural or worship a supernatural being to be a religion, you're actually conceding privilege, legal privilege, to organizations that do that over organizations that do not. So you can say you're just confusing people with this kind of wording, but you're not just. It's not just a matter of confusing people.
Yeah.
It's that kind of matter of ceding privilege and exemptions on a legal basis for those kinds of groups. So in that way, it's pointless for us to change our semantics in any way. And I think some of our founding fathers, particularly Jefferson, were quite clear at the beginning that religious exemption privilege was to encompass all types of religious opinion. And in a certain manuscript he wrote, he even included infidels as having some kind of say in their religious perspective as well. Now, today, it's common that people believe that not only do you have to worship a supernatural deity, but that it needs to be a particular one, and that there really is only one religious voice that's worthy of being heard in the public sphere, and that's what we're taking to challenge right now.
Yeah, that is interesting. For example, see, I assume you probably get criticism and maybe some kind of hate email or whatever over the internet. I assume you do.
Oh yeah.
See, when you get that kind of thing, do the people that are, hitting you with it, do they know that you're essentially an atheist and like that you don't worship some kind of devil, or do you find that they're ignorant of even that?
A lot of times it seems they're ignorant of even that, but they're willfully ignorant as well. Sometimes you get indications that they'll look at our material, but because the name Satan is there, they're convinced that whatever we might say that might sound rational or benign, it could only be a lie done in the name of the father of lies, of course. You can never, there's nowhere you can go with an argument like that. When we were doing a Black Mass event at Harvard, which we had put forward as being this academic presentation along with a reenactment, making it quite clear that this isn't really something we do. This was an academic performance.
Yeah.
We made it quite clear that we weren't using a consecrated host. And yet there was willful confusion amongst certain journalists and commentators. And then they put that confusion mostly on me, saying my statements were confusing, when in actuality, whenever I was asked about it, I was very clear we're not using a consecrated host. So it became clear at a certain point that certain people are just going to believe what they want to believe, and you can't tell them either way.
Yeah. And the thing is as well, in talking about the sort of figure of Satan, I know, like you've said before, you use it because he's a sort of symbol of the sort of, really eternal sort of rebel. But it really, I can see, some people might say, well, why do you bother with the Satan thing? Why not just drop that altogether? But for me, I can see that it's a very powerful image, and I mean, it really gets people's attention. I've read about you guys on different news sites and things like that. So that's what I think. I mean, would you agree that it's to do with the power behind the idea of Satan?
It's absolutely that, but it's more than that too, because it's not just for how people respond to it, it's for what it means to us, because we also grew up in this culture. It really couldn't be anything else. And further beyond that, I feel like the idea of Satanists and Satanism demands some kind of redemption or representation for the fact that if you let it be this kind of outgroup label that can conveniently be tacked on to people to accuse them of false crimes, you are also conceding something to these witch hunters who will use that again and again. When we see the Satanic Panic in our own modern times, in our secular halls of justice, and we see how that played out and how innocent people went to jail and had their lives ruined, I don't think it does us any good to say, as people often do, well, I'm an atheist, but I'm not a Satanist. And when you do that, you're giving credibility to this idea that somewhere there is this secret society of Satanists, these cult Satanists who are murdering babies and doing all these things in the name of evil alone.
But in the same token, there are people all over the world that kill in the name of their gods. So are we going to treat that with the same sort of, thing as some people?
Well, that was interesting because in Detroit there was recently a story that was reported in on one of the local newscasts where they had found a dead goat outside one of the buildings.
Sure.
And it had been gutted and charred, and there was no reason to ascribe any ritual behavior to this, because unreported in this newscast was the fact that within, I think, a mile radius there were like 3 halal markets where they sell goats. So who knows, But for some reason, one of the locals who saw this goat and called the officials said it looked to him like a satanic ritual. So that's how they reported this, is that it was a suspected satanic ritual, and there's this dead goat. And this was an annoyance to us because we're just now opening our first chapter house in Detroit. So we wanted to attack this head on. And we were saying that, we were very clear that there's no reason to believe this. There's no satanic doctrine that somebody can point to that would prescribe this. And further, you can look to the Old Testament and find passages about killing goats and lighting them on fire, even because the aroma apparently is very pleasant to the Lord.
Oh well, yeah.
But nobody was suspicious that there was some kind of rogue Jewish cult running around.
Yeah, exactly.
So I don't know.
Yeah. And what seems to be interesting as well, because like you had the Satanic Panic and it was the 1980s, but it seems like that's kind of kept alive today by modern conspiracy theorists, because I've heard a lot of these theories and they talk about things like the Illuminati, which to my knowledge haven't existed since the 1700s, and you hear people saying that, these elite people, they're all Satanists and they're all murdering children. And sure, there is like groups that control governments and things like that. I mean, roundtable groups we know about, like the Trilateral Commission or whatever, and they do have their own political agendas. I don't see where the Satanism bit comes into it, though. That just seems they go off a logical cliff at that point to me.
Well, yeah, now you're getting a bit deeper into it, and in some of my earlier inspiration for this. But something I had started doing was trying to figure out what actually initiated the Satanic Panic, and why did a lot of these people who were reporting these satanic cult crimes actually seem to believe it. And of course that got me into the whole controversy about recovered memory therapies, and this was something on the rise during the Satanic Panic and really helped it along, which was there was this kind of thinking within psychotherapy that some traumas were so severe that they couldn't be recalled. They were resigned because they were too painful into an unconscious part of the mind. And people who had undergone these serious long-term traumatic programs of torture, rape, whatever else, had completely forgotten about that part of their life. And those memories would be sectioned off into what would branch off into another personality sometimes. And that's where you got multiple personality disorder, now called dissociative identity disorder. So under hypnosis, these people would recall these stories of satanic abuse or whatever else. And then, I wanted to know what the parallels were to people who would recall stories of alien abduction. So I actually went around also, after talking to a lot of people who claimed they were abused by Satanists, and talked to people who believe they had been abducted by aliens, as well as people who do that kind of therapy that draw the memories out about aliens. And what you find naturally is that these memories these people recall almost 100% of the time match the assumptions of the hypnotist who's putting them under to recall these memories. And they develop these very kind of insular subcultures where they're fed these ideas that you can't talk to people who don't believe you because they don't validate you. And they, when it comes to satanic ritual abuse, they'll accuse you of not believing in child abuse at all if you call bullshit on the satanic ritual abuse claims. So if you look me up, you'll see a lot of hate about how I defend pedophiles and things like that because I call bullshit on the recovered memory thing. But something that's of utmost interest to me is that the manufacturers of the Satanic Panic, the people who were really promoting this to the media at the time, they haven't gone away for the most part. They're not doing anything differently now. They're just not seeking the attention for it. And the narrative has changed only to the degree that they say that now you can't get a fair trial on this kind of thing. And they blame an organization called the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, which did a lot of work to expose recovered memory therapies as this kind of spurious pseudoscientific practice. Now they still have these people recalling these memories, and a lot of times it'll ruin their lives. These people will recall this abuse, and then they'll hold to it like a real memory. And
Yeah.
it is absolutely the same as the alien abduction thing. They actually did a study at Harvard where they were trying to see if there was any difference between false memory trauma and real trauma when it's recalled. And they were finding that people who had traumatic memories of alien abduction had the same subtle physiological responses as those people who had had real traumas coming out of a war environment or whatever else. So this is a very harmful practice, and it's something I would really like to take to task and bring to public awareness. And hopefully I'll be able to do that now
Yeah.
with leverage the attention I've gotten for the Satanic Temple. But there's a particular group in the United States called the ISSTD, the International Society for the Study of Trauma and Dissociation, and it presents itself as this professional mental health organization. And that's what's horrifying. You have a lot of licensed mental health practitioners in there, but in the background, they're still promoting the most crass and ridiculous conspiracy theories you've ever heard about mind control and satanic cults in that kind of insane, lunatic stuff that's been thoroughly debunked. And they're actually deluding people who are coming to them. They're feeding them delusion rather than giving them the mental health they deserve. To me, it's one of the biggest scandals in our healthcare system today.
You see the kind of people that you're talking about that kind of propagate this myth of like satanic abuse. What do you think their motivation is? Like, why do you think they're so persistent on this?
Well, at first, I think it's the appeal of any conspiracy theory. At first, you have this kind of one problem that seems to explain them all, and they're able to congratulate themselves for seeing things as they are. They see behind the scenes, and now they understand the entire world, and it gives them a unique place in it. They see themselves as being directly pitted against evil, and they also have a solution for it. It's a very tidy kind of narrative in the way that it explains all the bad things in such a way that we can actually perhaps manage it. It may seem to be this omnipotent evil force, but we know what we're fighting against. And that unique place can't be overstated, because you have these therapists who feel like they've found the master key, the Rosetta Stone to all psychological problems. Everything can be defined by this condition of repressed memories, and they have this kind of godlike power they wield to re-narrate somebody's autobiographical memory. So it gets to the point where you can't point out the bad science to them. They're aware of it. It's all become part of the conspiracy to debunk them, bring them down, and help the Satanists at the top or whatever else. I mean, at some point there has to be some kind of willful effort to maintain this, but it's just too painful for them to let go. They've invested too much of their identity in it, and it's made them very important in the circle they're in. Yeah,
and I know what you mean, because you find a lot of this. I think it is kind of, in a way, it's more comforting to them because they feel like they understand there's nothing sort of that they don't get. They understand what the problem is, or think they do. I've watched a lot of sort of conspiracy type videos and things like that, and I've had like an interest in the occult and even other stuff like Satanism since I was like a teenager, sort of reading LaVey and things like that. And when I got older and I looked at some of these conspiracy theory videos, the inaccuracies about particularly like occult history and groups was actually quite staggering to me a lot of times. And a lot of the things that they were saying about, certain groups, like even groups say that aren't like yours, like say take a group like the Ordo Templi Orientis or the OTO, who are actually an occult group, even the things that they were trying to pin on them was rubbish. So then when I started hearing that one of the big things is that all these elites in power are all secret Satanists and they all like sacrifice children to the devil and all this, I was like, well, that's not even remotely what actual Satanism's all about. It's just it's so easy to see through it if you've actually done some research.
Right, and not only does it not make sense in a doctrinal sense, it doesn't even make sense at a basic psychological level. Why somebody who actually wields that kind of power would also feel motivated to act out this kind of narcissistic power symbolically. What then are you trying to prove? Why would Dick Cheney be off, say, murdering goats or whatever else? What more would he be trying to gain? You know?
Yeah, exactly. What
So
could that
I
possibly
think
do?
that's often going to be an expression of misanthropic outcasts who don't feel
Yeah.
they have any power over their situation in the real world.
Yeah, and that's what's so funny about it. But there is another aspect that I wanted to get into that I really noticed from visiting your website, and it's the fact that you guys are also involved in quite a few campaigns that are more sort of political, if you will. Like, for example, the one to distribute educational religious materials in Florida public schools. Why don't you tell us a bit about that and some of your other campaigns?
Yeah, that's where we really depart from other satanic groups
Yeah.
who are quite content to sit in the background and let the world pass them by. But I feel like that's really the essence of it. I have no desire to just walk around and tell people I'm a Satanist and look at their reaction or just
Yeah.
for the purpose of justifying dressing up in all black or
Yeah.
whatever you want to do. I mean, if that's what you want to do, that's fine.
By all
But for
means.
me, if you're going to have an organization, the only real point in it is to organize and to have some effect on the real world.
Of
And
course.
to me, it's intolerable to be consigned to second-class status just because some other group is being louder or more obnoxious or whatever the situation
Yeah.
may be. I mean, it's one thing to say that you're an outsider and you'll stand apart and you'll willingly do that. It's another thing, going back to the Satanic Panic again, is to allow yourself to be a scapegoat to the point where you can be imprisoned. The prejudice is so high against it that there's a definite threat against you. And to me, I feel like that's what we're really counteracting. We're showing that we really have no fear to show who we are, and there's really really no grounds by which they can deny us on certain things. And I think it may seem self-defeating, but in another 5 years, I think people will look at Satanism in a whole new way, and I think that could only be for the better.
Well, yeah, that's what I was thinking, when I was looking at your campaigns and things, because that isn't something we've really heard before, like if you look back at sort of other satanic groups who they don't do anything like that. But the fact that I think, if you're outreaching like that, and making yourselves public in that kind of way, then it allows people to see that you're not, a bunch of people who hang out in a big room wearing black robes and sacrificing things. It actually shows that you're thinking in a like a logically consistent way with your beliefs, and then not only doing that, but you're applying it to the real world through the use of like a campaign.
Yeah. Well, some people complain too, and they say, well, none of this is going to help. They're just going to say that, okay, you're not the satanic group we're talking about, but there are those other
The other
satanic groups.
ones.
But to me, that's still progress, because now you can't just use the generic label Satan
Yeah.
or Satanist and have people claim they know what they're talking about. Now they have to specify, who exactly do you mean? Are you talking about some kind of imaginary cult, or are you talking about the actual Satanists who are out in the world doing things? And you're getting closer to the point now where the religious label doesn't matter as much, and you actually have to judge people for what evidence you have of what behavior they're engaged in.
Yeah, and I totally get that. And it does make a lot of sense. The thing that I saw, that I think it was the first thing that sort of drew my attention when I found out about your group, was that you want to erect a statue of Baphomet in Oklahoma City, I believe. How is that going? And tell us, for anyone who doesn't know about it, why you want to do that.
Well, this is a very, I think, might be one of the most amusing things we've done to people, but I also think it's very important.
Yeah.
There's a lot to, this is really a tough battleground, and it's something I feel that really needs to be done. It goes
Yeah.
beyond just the symbolic level, but I feel that the fact that they're putting Ten Commandments monuments up on public lands like this and at the Oklahoma State Capitol is a definite overreach of the local authorities' power, and we need to call them out on that. And they had a Baptist minister in their legislature write this really unlettered, uneducated bill where he was putting forward the idea that the Ten Commandments are this kind of foundational document in American law. And according to this mythology, the Constitution was based partly upon the Ten Commandments, which absolutely makes no sense. If you look at the Ten Commandments and you look at the United States Constitution, the Constitution is quite clear that we're a nation based on religious liberty, and the Ten Commandments are very exclusive. You have these commands in there: "Thou shalt have no god before me." I mean, that alone is unconstitutional. "Thou shalt not worship graven idols," and the Ten Commandments itself being a graven idol kind of makes that ironic. And so the idea is that, being that we are constitutionally a nation based on religious freedom, if we follow the same standards by which they put up the Ten Commandments, we should be able to put up one of our own. And one thing that they can't deny it upon is viewpoint discrimination.
Yeah.
And a lot of people laugh and they say, well, obviously nobody, the bulk of Oklahoma isn't going to want that there, and they can't put it there. On a legal standpoint, though, that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how many people want it. They never took a vote on the Ten Commandments. They just said that it was privately donated, and they're saying it has this kind of historical value, so therefore it's there. Well, we put together this design for a monument that we felt had a lot to say about history as well. And I talked about in interviews and in debates I've had about the history of the idea of Baphomet and how now it has all these kinds of balancing binary elements, and how we want it to stand as a monument in memorial to the unjustly outcast, those burned at the stake, and as kind of an homage to the trial and error that led to our development of secular law, which respects certain propositions such as the accuser's burden of proof, innocence until proven guilty. These kinds of things we use to combat against this kind of witch hunting mentality. And I feel in that way it speaks more to American law than the Ten Commandments possibly could. And it has historical basis, and it's being privately donated. So we're at this situation now where I feel like they're going to have a very difficult kind of legal case to make. But what's horrifying is that they're trying to put us off. They're saying that they're not going to consider new monuments until the case they have against the American Civil Liberties Union, who filed suit against the Ten Commandments monument, is resolved. Well, just last week, a judge completely dismissed the ACLU case, which is horrifying that an Oklahoma judge could do that, to say that there's actually no basis for a case that the Ten Commandments monument is unconstitutional. I mean, it shows that at every level of their government in Oklahoma, they have no idea what the actual American law is. These old bastards have no fucking clue, that they won't even look at the case, so it will probably have to move up to the Supreme Court. And I see that happening probably in our case too. But the level of audacity in Oklahoma is such that we've sent letters asking them to advise us on the next steps now that our monument is almost complete. In mid-November now, it's been pushed back a few times, we're finally going to be at the foundry, and Vice is going to come film it. And we're going to construct the final monument in all its glory, and then we'll really be ready to, fight the fight in Oklahoma and have it placed there. But what Oklahoma has done is just decided to simply ignore us. And they haven't replied to our further requests. So we filed a Freedom of Information Act request for all their communications related to us and our monument request. And it's quite obvious that they didn't send us everything. So their disregard for the law that they're supposed to represent is just, it's unbelievable, and it's reprehensible. And I can't understand how people, even who identify as Christians, who feel that their own specific tribe is being represented, couldn't be very disturbed by the fact that their own officials are so willing to use the law and rules to their own ends in this way.
It's interesting you say that because, people, especially people that are incredibly religious, they talk about freedom of religion. And it's funny because I wonder if they really mean freedom of religion or just freedom for their own religion.
Well, funnily enough, I was having the same thought because
Weird.
yeah, because it kind of seems to me like you guys are sort of much more up for actual religious liberty than many people that are, in what we might call, say, traditional religions.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if you're aware of the Fox News network over
Oh,
Oh
in the
yeah.
I've
United
heard
States.
of them. I've heard of them. They're
Yeah,
very
yeah.
they're very up and coming. Yes.
Yeah, we're quite familiar.
But they're also very very conservative, very right
Oh
wing,
yeah.
very very aligned with the Republican Party over here. But they often dress up their constitutional rhetoric. They always claim to have the constitutional high ground. If a
Oh, right.
religious group wants to do something, they always say this is religious liberty in action.
Oh.
We believe in what our founding fathers thought were, the rights of every American. So they're often very confused to have me on, and they can realize sometimes it's a very difficult situation because I can turn that rhetoric right back on them
Yeah.
and tell them, I believe in religious liberty. I believe in our constitutional values of free speech. And they have a very difficult time arguing against that, though they want to. And sometimes that manifests itself in bizarre cognitive dissonance, like I had on the Laura Ingraham show, where she summarized by saying, I understand this whole push for religious freedom values and that kind of thing. However, not for a group of idiotic pranksters like yourselves.
Oh my goodness.
Like how she kind of summarized it. And you see these really bizarre kind of efforts to put us on the other side of constitutional law, like in this Florida case where we're trying to distribute literature to the kids in response to evangelical materials being given out in the public schools.
Of course.
One of the news sources talked to a representative for the evangelical organization that was handing out the Bibles, and according to him, the Satanic Temple is trying to suppress his free speech somehow. He says we're trying to we're just working to shut down any voices that disagree with us, and it's just very ironic to see the kind of argument turned around like that.
Wow.
That's wild. I mean, do you think that's what people try and do? They try and sort of make out that you're not a serious organization, you're just trying to get people's backs up, and you're just trying to sort of all you're trying to do is just basically cause trouble, when they don't realize that, if they would actually pay attention and listen to you, there's a much sort of deeper point to what you do.
Well, yeah, they do that all the time, and one of the things they do is they'll pull from one of my earlier Vice interviews where I was very upfront about everything, how this all came about, and I had no illusions coming into it about how controversial this would be, and I felt like I was actually putting my life on the line. So,
right.
I felt like I had a lot of potential, professional potential, and my reputation wasn't bad. I was doing well, I thought. So I really didn't want this. So originally the idea is maybe we could do a finite project, do this for a limited time and make a film, and I thought maybe we could put together some campaigns for the Satanic Temple where we would do these very kind of high profile campaigns, then we'd cut it off, and then we make a film about it, and hopefully that would inspire people to think different. That would, and then maybe we could give the Satanic Temple over to other people who wanted to maintain it and manage it and were aware of the consequences but willing to take them up. Well, once it got started, that very quickly changed. It became much bigger than I thought it would ever be. A lot of people wanted to join up and have a part in it, and I was very concerned about managing the message and making sure that we were understood. And it didn't take long before people recognized me anyway. So the damage was already done there. So then very very soon I was all in. And in telling this, what certain journalists or bloggers like to take from this is, well, they're just making a film, and they're just, they're not Satanists, and they're just trying to agitate people, and this is all for the gain of doing a film. And the funny thing is even when it was a film idea, there wasn't any idea that we would really gain from it monetarily. This was activist filmmaking. This was like activist documentary making.
Sure.
So so you'll see that idea kind of floating around where, well, these are just some filmmakers having a laugh at everybody, but it was never true before, and it's not true now. And it gets to the point where when is it going to become ridiculous to make that claim? How many years are we going to go on making a film? And at what point could I possibly turn around and say, all right, I'm packing up and I'm out of here, without people justifiably wanting my head?
Well, now you said there, you were saying like a lot of people you found wanted to join and stuff. Do you find that Satanism is actually growing in the US?
I think it is because of us, and I really think we represent the Satanic Reformation, and that's how some academics of modern Satanism have worded it. I know there's this one religions blog based out of a university, Religion Dispatches, and they early on kind of labeled us Satanic Reformation. And people who really follow Satanism see we depart from established Satanism by LaVey in certain ways. And we did that right from the start. We threw words out there like compassion and empathy. Mm-hmm. And part of that came from, I had a very early exposure to LaVey, and I really, really gravitated to it. And he writes in these very social Darwinistic terms.
Oh, yeah, I've read them,
Nietzschean individuality sense, and how, sympathy and empathy, those kinds of things are a weakness. And I took that kind of thing seriously for a time. And then I began to study cognitive science and evolution, actual evolutionary mechanics, and game theory. You find that's just not true. Altruism, empathy, these are vital parts of human cognition. And if the overriding value you have is to be the best kind of person you can be, the best individual who hones all your intellectual capabilities, you also need those emotional capabilities. Certain cognitive scientists like Antonio Damasio have actually shown that these kinds of factors, the empathy, the sympathy you have, correlate very strongly with your rational skills. You need this kind of thing. There's no point in cultivating psychopathic tendencies.
Yeah.
So if you really want to follow, I think, the highest values I think that could be instilled in you by the earlier Satanism, it would be to admit that that's wrong and to move forward in a different direction, and to see that we can do better this way, and we have to acknowledge what we're better off doing in a group. I know it's it's really anathema to the earlier Satanism to say that you do anything in a group at all. But there again, there's no point in having a church of Satan or a Satanic Temple, if you're not going to work towards the mutual benefit of you and the people you've gained around you. So we really are a radical departure, I think, from LaVeyan Satanism in ways that a lot of people don't seem to recognize, because I feel like these kinds of values we espouse, a lot of people were getting out of LaVeyan Satanism anyway, and just kind of ignoring the parts that disagreed with them.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to have you on the show, actually, because like I said, I was browsing through news websites and I sort of saw something that said Satanic Temple, and anytime I hear anything like that, I'm always like, oh, I have to see what it's all about, given what I know. And when I went to your website, I got that straight away. I was like, this is a completely different tone from what I knew from, like, say, LaVeyan Satanism. I thought it was a completely not completely different, but the tone and the way you approached it was so much. It was almost like an evolution for me, like, of Satanism. And kind of what I wondered, do you find that you've had maybe people who were, say, in the Church of Satan or something before, then gravitating towards, the Satanic Temple, or is that something you haven't really seen so much?
No, we actually have seen a lot of that. And what they gravitate towards initially is the fact that we're actually doing things. We're actually taking action. And it doesn't matter to them so much the items we depart on. They all kind of have their personal interpretation of Satanism anyways. The important elements to them is that they feel it's this kind of vehicle for symbolic revolt against cultural norms that are stifling to them. So there's these kind of very basic elements to them are being adhered to, so the rest doesn't matter as much. But for me, being that we were moving very fast and didn't have, I haven't had the opportunity to write a book yet or anything. I made empathy and compassion quite clearly present on our material from the get-go, and I thought it would be far more controversial within modern Satanism than it actually is. And it shows to me that this does resonate with a lot of people, and it's not necessary to throw out this kind of scary psychopathic rhetoric, in that you can really rally the troops in a better way than has ever been done before.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. I think you're right. Well, this has been great, Lucien. But before we start to just wrap up here, why don't you tell us how people can find you online, your website, and any talks or anything you'd like to plug? Feel free.
Yeah, well, of course, always check for updates on our website, thesatanictemple.com, and look for us on Facebook. We have a lot going on there. A lot of people seem to communicate to us through Facebook. I have a couple conferences coming up. I'm speaking at the Secular Student Alliance conference. I think that's not till summer, but I'm also speaking at American Atheists in early April for anybody in the States and interested in that. That'll be in Memphis. Otherwise, it's best to check on Facebook and see if I have any public speaking lectures coming up or anything of the like. I actually do get invited out quite a lot, quite a surprising number of times given what I represent. So I think the cultural effect is already clear.
Yeah, or what you're perceived to represent.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, Lucien, I want to say thank you so much for coming on the show, because on the Greeting It podcast, Dan and I are really interested in how other people live and different perspectives, out of the ordinary, if you will, belief systems. So I just want to say it means a lot, and thank you. So for more libertarian podcast ratings and news, go to greetingitpodcast.co.uk.
And Lucien, thank you so much.
Thank you.